Hey folks, thanks for checking into the Neutral Zone Hotel. We're an unapologetically left-leaning podcast that explores hockey at its best and its worst. I'm Benjamin. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a hometown fan of the Ottawa Charge and a lifelong fan of the Montreal Canadiens, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the Neutral Zone Hotel. Along with me today to ensure you have a great stay is my friend SJ.
Hi, I'm SJ. My pronouns are they, them, and I am a dedicated and persistent Seattle Kraken fan, joining you from the great city of rainy Seattle.
Hello, SJ.
Hi.
How are things and stuff?
Very 500. Very 500.
Oh.
Yeah.
Just like the Kraken, I hear you win a game, then you lose a game.
Yeah, so. Pretty much. Very
Speaking of winning
mid.
A game and losing a game, last week I got to go to my first two Ottawa Charge home games of the season. Ottawa beat Toronto in the first one and then lost to Montreal at the Canadian Tire Centre for the second.
How was the Canadian Tire Centre?
You know, it was an all right experience. They didn't really advertise it the way they advertised both of the big arena games for the PWHL last year in Toronto and Montreal. It didn't get a flashy title. It didn't get a big tag. It was just, it's a game at the CTC. Combined with it being in December and a few other things going on, as well as, you know, only like a couple weeks announcement. They didn't sell out. It only had about 11,000 people.
But more than the regular rink can hold, though.
Yeah, it's more than TD Arena can hold. They had lots of girls hockey teams and ringette teams in, but the vibes were a little off, and you could tell. And part of that, I think, is TD Arena really does feel like home, both for the team and the fans. So even though I had a much nicer seat, in terms of, like, it was a much more comfortable seat. It was one of the new ones that Ann Lauer put in during the summer. And in terms of, you know, there's a little bit more amenities and stuff in the arena. Even though that was true, it did feel off. I can't really describe it more than that. It didn't feel like home.
The vibes were not there.
Yeah, TD Place really does have immaculate vibes. So I am looking forward to getting back there in January.
I think there's a real difference between being in a arena that you're filling and being in a big arena that you are not close to filling. And there's just a different energy that you can't quite put your finger on.
Yeah, I agree with that. And again, it did feel weird. And I think the team felt a little weird too. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm looking forward to January a lot and seeing the Charge back in town. They're out of town. So the PWHL is off this week for an international break as there's a Euro hockey tournament. And then they're out of town for 3 weeks because of the World Junior Hockey Championships being held in Ottawa. So I don't get to see them until January.
Oh, brutal. I know we were talking about this earlier offline, but they really need to. It's ridiculous that they would play for, like, what is it, week and a half, and then go on a break. They take too many international breaks. It shouldn't take 6 months to play 30 games.
The end of the season is like that too, with the World Championships, and then so you're off for basically a month, and then you play for 10 days, then you're in the playoffs.
Yeah,
I'm not a fan of the international schedule. I don't know that the rivalry series needs to continue, for example.
Yeah.
They're intentionally targeting much smaller hockey markets with it this year. Mm-hmm. So games in Charlottetown and Boise, these are not major hockey meccas, nor do they have a lot of people, period. So
I like Boise as someone who has been there, but yeah, that's not a major hockey town. They've got the Steelheads. They've got an ECHL team.
Yeah, they weren't packing a major arena like the Climate Pledge Arena or...
Well, to be fair, they only sold the lower bowl in CPA when they were in Seattle for rivalry, but...
Yeah, but still.
It's still a major
just feels
hockey
like,
market, yeah.
Considering how the sales are going there for the takeover game, I would say that they are... It feels like it's smaller now. And that's... I think that's okay. But hopefully Hockey Canada and Hockey USA recognize that and make some decisions around maybe winding that tournament down. And hopefully the IIHF makes some decisions on moving the women's championships to the other side of the Walter Cup playoffs.
That would be convenient. I feel like the only real reason to keep doing rivalry is that it is an opportunity for the college players on the international teams to get playing time, but they don't even play them, but like they're not available in like December, January. They're playing in college. So like they get them during basically preseason to the college season.
I also think it's I think there's some money for the pro players as well with the national teams in there.
Yeah.
And that is important.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, as that will be less important as the PWHL starts playing better or paying better. Then international players won't be relying on getting money for playing these rivalry games, but still. Yeah, it's just not, I don't think it's really sustainable long term for them to break play for the Euro Hockey Tour and the rivalry series. I don't think the World Championships are going anywhere. I think that even if maybe they reschedule them. Based on like the way they schedule the men's World Championships, I don't know that they will want to do that, but.
And comparatively to the men's World Championships, the women's World Championships are very important to the history and to where the league came from. So there is a level of deference there, and I get it. But also, I really don't want this league to be broken up 4 times a year by international breaks anymore.
Yeah.
So it would just be great if they can get their stuff in order and sort it out. Speaking of the PWHL.
Yes.
Maggie Flaherty has been suspended 2 games after hitting Alina Müller, quite a dangerous hit. What I found interesting about this was the hit happened, Müller went down, and they called a major on the ice and then reviewed it and pulled it back to a minor, only to later suspend Flaherty for 2 games, which is, in the PWHL, probably the longest suspension we've seen yet.
It's real mixed signals. They clearly either... Okay, so I don't know whether that was the referees on the ice who made that decision or whether it was a PWHL Central who made that decision. But whoever did, they just basically got a slap on the wrist by player safety.
So PWHL says that it was an automatic review by the on-ice officials and the Central Situation Room.
Yeah, so there's a real lack of alignment there on what we should be enforcing as far as the rules go, and I think that's a little bit concerning. Maybe that might raise some red flags to Jana Hefford, who's the VP of Hockey Ops for the PWHL. You don't want to have that kind of thing happening. But I do think at the end of the day, I am pleased that they did end up suspending for the hit, because it was real dangerous. She kind of went in like all chicken wing on it, and she didn't end up making the kind of contact she seemed to be going for with her elbow, but it looked really awful. And we got to get that. We can't tolerate that stuff. I just don't want to. I don't want to see it in the PWHL. So I was glad they came down on her.
I'm really glad they have seemed to have tightened up the rule, and that they, even if the on-ice review failed in this instance, and I'm glad for the suspension, we don't need to see flying elbows like that in the league.
Yep.
So speaking of flying elbows, let's turn to the NHL and talk about the ongoing, interesting issues with Jacob Trouba and the New York Rangers. So late last week, news broke that there was a threat to Trouba to send him to the minors.
Well,
he has a 15.
They threatened to waive him.
Waive him, yeah.
And in which case, anyone could pick him up.
Now, this brings back memories of Barclay Goodrow in the offseason, who went through a similar process, was waived, and Mike Greer seemed he already had the facts to the NHL head office ready to put in his waiver claim. So the belief at the time was that Jury had already contacted a team who was interested in Trouba and was willing to put in a waiver claim to take his entire $8 million salary.
Yeah, there's a pretty persistent, I guess basically what the insiders are saying was that there was kind of an agreement ahead of time that if they had waived him, a team would have picked him up, and they might have then soft completed the trade by sending assets back to New York. So essentially using waivers to end run around his no trade clause.
Now, it is possible that if that is a threat he received, that'll go up to Marty Walsh and the NHLPA, who would not be happy about it. But things like this have happened in the past, where players with no trades, but are waived, teams claim opposite. It's kind of like a back end runaround.
Yep. This is what did the Lightning did to Ryan McDonough. Is they said told him they were going to waive him if he didn't waive his, and I believe he had a full no trade, but he didn't have a no move, and he agreed to the trade to Nashville under that threat. But the Lightning managed to do that to McDonough while still maintaining a cordial relationship with him, because they then traded for him back for this season when they moved out Sergachev. So just a little bit bizarre, but it's not a thing that doesn't ever happen.
Yeah, exactly. And I would think that, at the end of the day, Trouba chose to go to Anaheim, who was at least one of the teams interested. They received back something. I don't remember what, a player and a few picks.
It was Urho Vakanainen and a 2026 fourth or something like that.
Yeah, it's just incredible they didn't have to pay to move the contract. An $8 million replacement level defender. With a history of bad hits and also slamming into the boards like a bullet that one time.
Yeah.
Where he was 90-degree vertical from the boards. That was really great.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what is clear is that there must have been more than one bad team who wanted that contract, because otherwise they would have had to pay to get off of it. There was talk about Detroit and Columbus. I think he squashed a trade to Detroit over the summer. I think Columbus would have picked him up on waivers if they could have. They have plenty of space. So the fact that these teams really felt like there was value in taking Trouba on is, I'm just kind of seriously roll my eyes at. But they did, and that is the reason that New York managed to get off that entire contract.
So the reason that he didn't go to Detroit this time has been speculated or thrown around in the media that Detroit wanted to send an asset back, and that asset had a no trade clause and chose not to waive. So the only people who have no trade clauses that I would think would be expendable for the Red Wings are Jeff Petrie, Ben Sherratt, possibly an Andrew Kopp, but I think he would go. Tarasenko has a no trade clause. Patrick Kane has a no trade clause, but you can't imagine either of those players are being offered up.
Yeah.
But Petrie
I bet it was Petrie.
Yeah, he wants to be in Detroit. And I think Sherratt is another possibility. He is going to get better minutes in Detroit than he's going to get elsewhere, and that might give him another contract.
Yeah.
So that is certainly a possibility.
Yep, for sure.
And then with the money they got from that, they signed Igor Shesterkin to his big deal. $11.5 million over 8 years, full no move clause, so they can't Trouba him. Front loaded, $15 million plus in the first year, and minimum salary only. So $775 this year, $850 next year, $900,000 for the rest of the contract. This cannot be moved. It cannot be bought out. The Rangers cannot be bought out. Cannot be bought out. The Rangers are ride or die with Igor Shesterkin, who then missed the next game because his wife was having a baby. Can you believe the lack of drive in this guy? Holy smokes.
Hey, the Kraken won that game.
And to be fair, the Kraken's starting goaltender also could not show up because, by all accounts, he was barfing and pooping too much.
Yeah, Bilesma said he couldn't keep food down. So all I have to say is, Joey, do not eat the New York sushi. Just stay away. I've been there. I also have made that mistake. Just don't eat it.
You can get sushi on the West Coast.
That's right.
Joey, when you are on the West Coast, you can get sushi. If you're really interested in fine eating, wait until 2026 when Team Canada gives you an all expenses paid trip to Italy.
I will laugh if he actually does bother to get a Canadian passport, so he would be eligible to be chosen for Team Canada. But I gotta say, it's really, I mean, he'd have to go to Canada, and like, it's so far away from Seattle. It's so far away. Really tough.
I'm pretty sure that the Minister for Sport herself would go over to the passport office and put it through. I think they would put a rush job on it. We treat this stuff as matters of national security. Hockey's pretty important in Canada. We'll talk about that later.
I mean, it'll be funny when Canada ride or dies with Jordan Binnington in the Olympics, though.
Aiden Hill and Sam Montembeault. Come on.
Sam Montembeault is not going to see the ice on the Four Nations.
If it's Jordan Binnington, it's not ride or die, it's die or die.
I could not. Okay, that's a digression. I'm going to stop. I'm just saying, I watched some of World Championships this past summer. I watched Binnington play in the World Championships. I could not believe they were like, yeah, we're definitely taking this guy to Four Nations. All right, that's it.
I think
that's
they wanted. I think like when this tournament was announced, they're like, okay, we'll take Tristan Jarry. He's pretty good. And then this year happened, and it's like, no, that guy is an actual train wreck.
We aren't even supposed to talk about Four Nations until after the break.
Oh, well. So, what do you think about the Shesterkin deal?
I think that in 4 years, it won't matter because Chris Drury won't be the GM and the Rangers will be rebuilding anyway. So it's all good.
When you commit to a goaltender for 8 years with this kind of money, with this type of no trade protection, as a Habs fan, I'm a bit of an expert on what can happen.
He can destroy his knees.
No, Chris Kreider plays for the Rangers, not against them.
Hey, that's
so unless he takes it on practice.
They're trying to trade him.
They shouldn't. They should keep him. They should say to themselves, we have a lot of money invested in our goaltender. Chris Kreider should remain a Ranger.
And tell Kreider, be like, okay, just FYI, you gotta stay away from Shesterkin, though.
Not even in practice. Keep them on the same squad in practice and everything. But no, like, is Igor Shesterkin one of the handful of goaltenders in the NHL that I believe has the capacity to steal Stanley Cup Series? Yeah. Like, I think it's him. I think it's Hellebuck. That might be the list.
I mean, I don't know what to think of
did it that one time.
Ottinger has done it. I don't know what.
Yeah, Vasilevsky did it, but years ago now.
He's not over the hill yet. I just don't know. He hasn't been very good in the past, for about a year. But he had back surgery. Who knows?
I don't think Sorokin is as advertised either. So,
Yeah.
We're going to end up seeing this with, like, Dustin Wolf. We're going to be talking about the next guy.
Dustin Wolf, if you want to become a Canadian citizen, now is your time, bud.
That's right. He is American. Silvertips legend, Dustin Wolf. I think the Silvertips might have his number retired.
They should. He put up like a 940 while he played for them.
Yeah.
Ridiculous.
Yeah, he's great. Low key should get the Calder this year. If he plays like this all year, forget it, Celebrini. Sit back.
Yeah, but Celebrini looks like he's 31 years old and has hired goons at hand, so.
I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I think this is the right call. I think that Shesterkin is that good. And I think 11.5, it's a lot of money, but it's not that much. It's not as much as Carey Price's deal.
It's
if they can get out from Panarin's money comes off the book after next year.
It's more than Carey Price's deal, but less of a percentage of the cap.
But yeah, that's what I meant. So then they really only have a couple really stinky deals. Zibanejad's been having a really bad year, and if he's done, then that's a huge anchor. But I don't know that he's done. I think he's just having a bad year.
Yeah, for all I know, he's nursing some kind of terrible injury, and he's going to end up with getting surgery for it in the off season. And he'll have it like a year where he can't play because he's healing from hip surgery and some shit, and then it'll be Sean Monahan.
Yeah,
it could happen.
Yeah, so there's possibilities. He's having a good year, Sean Monahan.
What a great year.
The Jackets are bad, but they're not despondent.
I did like 5 minutes on Sean Monahan on the last show. I don't think you were on.
I know. I listened to it, though. Speaking of despondent, the Chicago Blackhawks have fired Luke Richardson and brought in Anders Sorenson as the interim head coach. What do you think?
Yeah, it probably needed to happen. He had kind of gotten to a point with Bedard where he was playing him on the third line with Ilya Mikheyev, and like, don't do that. I don't know. Also, one thing that they're finally calling up Frank Nazar from the AHL, which is interesting. I think he's playing tonight. Yeah. I think they've got real problems in Chicago with some of the signings they made over the summer. Like, Bertuzzi has been an absolute nightmare for them. And they've signed these guys like Hall and Bertuzzi and so on. These guys are supposed to like be the veteran wingers for Bedard, and then they're both bad and he's not playing with them. So it's like, and I'm not sure exactly everything that Luke Richardson could have done. But on the other hand, he was obviously not handling it very well, and Kyle from Chicago also needed a scapegoat for that. So coach has got to go.
Yeah, it's tough for me to see this as an entirely fair firing based on the record. But if you take the record out of it and you look at the management of Bedard, which I think is probably the only thing a coach should be judged on, it's very clear that Bedard is not flourishing. He's certainly having a sophomore slump, and it might be partially the management. Now, if Sorensen can't wake him up, then I think you do have an issue, and the issue is partially roster construction. You know, they brought in a few names that were supposed to be at least moderately okay, like Bertuzzi, and they've mostly been stinky. So it does feel like they built to tank too hard if you compare to San Jose, who brought in, a pretty good goal scorer in Tyler Toffoli, and they inherited Mikael Granlund from the Pens in the Carlson deal, who's had a decent year.
They also brought in oh my God, from the Kraken center.
Bjorkstrand?
No.
The handsome one.
Yes.
The guy that people were sexually harassing on TikTok.
Oh my God. I can't remember his name. What is happening?
Handsome hockey player.
Oh, it's great. Good job.
Not Lundqvist.
Alexander Wenberg.
Yeah,
I'm very
Alexander
embarrassed
Wenberg.
that I could not remember his name. He's a great player if you want to ensure that nothing bad happens. Nothing will happen. Nothing good's going to happen either. But like he's a real safety blanket kind of forward. So he's like basically ideal if you're just looking to insulate some young mistake-prone players because you can play him with those players and he will kind of clean up their mess. But like also he might like throw a wet blanket over the entire play. So although he's scored more than I thought he would this year. So
People need to throw a wet blanket over his legions of TikTok admirers anyway. I think that there is definitely a difference in the roster construction of the two teams.
mm-hmm.
And I think that it shows. San Jose is bad, but they're watchable. And they've been a fair bit of fun, especially when Celebrini's been popping off. And Will Smith, he had a slow start to the season, but he's starting to pick up. This is good.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's what you need. And in fact, I think that they were a little worried about it, which is why they moved Mackenzie Blackwood a bit early.
Yeah, they are about to get worse because they're now playing Forgiev.
Yeah, Alexander Forgiev. So that's the last piece of NHL news we want to talk about. Colorado has rebuilt the goaltending by picking up Wedgwood and Blackwood. SJ put down what would be next. And I laughed at this in our pre-show discussion. But dear listeners, I want you to understand that this is what we have to deal with week in and week out. So
He for sure would. We're coming for you.
that's right. Yeah, like it's no team has ever traded both of their starting night goaltenders before Christmas before. So certainly it was very clear that goaltending was not working in Colorado, and Chris McFarland has gone out of his way to solve that. And in doing so, acquiring Blackwood, who's been on a 2-year rehabilitation with the Sharks, seems like a smart move.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when you consider that it almost feels like when Mike Greer brought Wedgwood in, getting my woods confused. When he brought in Blackwood, part of bringing him in was let me get you some starting time when low pressure, get your game back, and then find a good parking spot for you where you can be successful. And it's tough to argue that on a team that won the Stanley Cup with Darcy Kemper's one good eye, that the Colorado Avalanche are not a great parking spot for a guy like Mackenzie Blackwood.
Yeah, I think it was great, great management from Greer. I think, and if both Blackwood and Georgiev are UFAs at the end of this year, so Greer hasn't tied himself to any horrible contracts. And if Blackwood plays well for the Avs this season, they'll extend him, so he can really play himself into a great spot.
Yeah, I think that is true. I also think that it's really good asset management. They spent a 6th to get Blackwood and turned him into a 2nd and a 4th, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
That's the sort of thing you need to do. It's not huge, but it's smart GMing. And I think it makes him look good as well. So from a position of a player who's thinking, should I take a deal in San Jose in the offseason? Obviously, a guy like Tyler Toffoli took a 4-year deal because his wife's from the West Coast. He wanted to live in California. He has a Stanley Cup. Let's get a good sized contract. But if you're looking at that, should I take a 1-year deal or a 2-year deal? And your options are, Chicago or San Jose or one of the other bottom feeding teams. San Jose has just shown that they will rehabilitate a player.
Mm-hmm.
And then find a good landing spot for him. And I think that helps build the reputation of that front office with players who are looking for a temporary home before resuming their career. So I think that helps Greer as well, showing that he will go out of his way to do that. He had to spend a lot of his better assets on moving out players, aka his retention slots, to move those huge contracts that people thought were unmovable.
Yeah, but you know what? Brent Burns comes off their cap this year.
That's right. So, and that wasn't him. He didn't move Burns. But he's used his slots to clean up that cap sheet and done a very good job of it.
Yeah, it's Carlson and Hurdle, and the retention on Carlson is only 1.5 for this year and the next 2 years. Hurdle, the retention is 1.3 until 2028. But like, when in 2028 or in 2027, 2028, nobody's going to care about 1.3.
It's the slot that matters more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
I suspect there will be a suitor for Mikael Granlund this year with how well he's played.
Oh, absolutely. They will get assets for him at the deadline.
They will have to probably involve a third person or take a bad contract back.
Yeah.
And I could certainly see them taking a bad contract back. They have tons of space for it. And they have really, other than Logan Couture, Tyler Toffoli, and Barclay Goodrow, they have nobody over the age of 23 that they have any money committed to in 2026.
Mm-hmm.
So they're in a very clean cap situation. They're still waiting for Couture is not back. I know Marc-Edouard Vlasic has been off the whole year, and it seems like he might be off to Robidaw Island.
Yeah, and he's only got one more year.
Yeah.
Couture has 2 more.
He's not going anywhere. His stuff is there. So I don't think he wants to get traded to a contender. I think he might just be done.
Right.
Yeah, so I think they're perfectly fine.
I do agree.
So, yeah, big fan of what Mike Greer's done, and this is just another very smart trade for him, both from the actual cap management piece, the asset management piece, and the player rehabilitation piece. And yeah, if Georgiev plays a little bit better, maybe he gets another deal next year somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was okay as a backup. He could go back down to a $1.5 million deal and get a backup job somewhere, and he'd be fine. He just couldn't. I just don't think he was ever really a starter.
No, and Colorado signed him because they thought maybe he had a little bit more to give, and also because they thought their system would insulate even an average player and carry them to success. And it's possible that they did, and they did to an extent last year.
Mm-hmm.
But he's been the worst goaltender in the NHL this year, other than maybe Connor Ingram.
Yeah, Connor Ingram is an interesting. Connor Ingram was really good last year, and I think he's just having a bad year. He's injured, but I don't think Connor Ingram is forever bad.
I mean, he's either having a bad year or last year was his one good year.
Yeah, maybe.
We'll have to see.
Goalies are variable, inconsistent.
Goalies are strange magic. That's for sure. They're strange brew, to use a Canadian term. SJ, do you have any other NHL nonsense you want to talk about?
No.
Okay. So why don't we take a short break? Just as a reminder before that, why don't you hit us up on Instagram or Blue Sky at Neutral Zone Hotel? If you want to hang out with us, you can join the Discord, neutralzonehotel.com/Discord. We're on YouTube at Neutral Zone Hotel. Give us a thumbs up, smash that like button if you're on YouTube, give us 5 stars or a thumbs up on your podcast player. That'll help spread the news of the show. And if you want to email us, feedback at neutralzonehotel.com, which I'm told goes directly to SJ and has a very loud and annoying ringtone. So fill the mailbox up and bother them at weird times of the night. All right, we'll be right back. Thanks, everybody. Hey folks, we're back. Okay. So the other big news that dropped last week was the final rosters for the Four Nations face-off have been revealed. I think that the rosters have been analyzed to death everywhere.
True.
Maybe 2 or 3 quick thoughts from you, SJ?
I am very disappointed that Cole Caulfield did not make Team USA. And as a result, I will be hoping for the unfortunate injury to the following players. Kyle Connor
And I better not pick JT Miller. Trevor will get mad. Brock Nelson, you have to go. So that Caulfield can be an injury replacement. Maybe a minor injury to your, like, an upper body something, sore shoulder, maybe something that'll heal, but, like, definitely can't play in Four Nations, so...
I just want to say Brock Nelson is such a dumb pick for this roster. I get it, he's going to be on a line with the Kachucks just to punch people, but come on. Come on.
The Kachucks don't need help punching people.
They shouldn't.
USA Hockey and Hockey Canada have the same kind of, like, well, we can't just bring a roster of all skill guys. We got to have size, and we got to have people who are going to play a role. And it's like, do ya? Maybe
I actually think if you just rolled 4 lines of the high-scoring forwards, it would be a shit ton of fun.
It would be so fun. It would be way more fun, and especially for the fact that this is not a meaningful tournament. This is Olympics practice. Just bring the fun. Sell some tickets.
I don't have to worry about selling the tickets. I am annoyed that Nick Suzuki didn't make Team Canada, as he has turned into a very, very good defensive forward. But apparently he said no to the World Championships, so that's it. You're done, buddy.
Yeah. That's annoying.
The only person on that team that I think shouldn't be there is Brad Marchand, because he's had a bad year.
But he was announced ahead of time.
Yes, they're kind of stuck with him now.
Yeah.
Enjoy riding the pine, Brad. That's all I have to say. I don't like I said, I don't really want to get too deep into the rosters, because you can find that anywhere. You can pull that up on The Athletic or ESPN, where friend of the show, Greg Wyshynski, did an in-depth review. But we wanted to talk a little bit more about why this tournament is kind of important and some of the antecedents to it. So as everybody knows, SJ is slightly new to hockey. The Seattle Kraken do not have a long history, and although Seattle itself has a storied history with the game of hockey, it has been on major break for a long while. So what I thought I'd do is I'd go over the history of international hockey with SJ, give them a chance to ask questions and learn to the heart content, with a special focus on where best on best play came from and sort of how it came to be and all that. Spoilers, it's the Cold War, but also why it changed hockey for the better, because I think that we are in a much better place as a result of that advent. So we'll do this behind the bastard style. I've written an essay, SJ. You probably know some of this stuff, but just interrupt me anytime that you want to ask a question or to say whatever, throw in comments, be funny so that people listening laugh,
Oh,
that
pressure.
sort of thing. Pressure's on, be a funny pal.
Yeah.
All right. So the game of hockey, the history of the international sport. So as we know, hockey comes from a lot of early inspirations. There's many places it came from. The game of bandy, which is Scandinavian or Russian, depending on who you believe, was codified in England in the 1800s, which happened during a craze to codify sports that we get association football and rugby and cricket and hurling, which is also a weird hockey antecedent. By the 1850s, people were skating on ice in New Brunswick playing games with sticks. And shinny, which is basically pickup hockey, originated in Nova Scotia sometime over the next 10 years. However, the desire to formalize that game continued, and what we would call the first game of indoor ice hockey occurred on March 3rd, 1875, in Montreal.
Ooh.
This sport progressed very rapidly in Canada. That probably shocks you, but it turns out hockey big in Canada.
I have a
By
question.
1880, yes.
Did they have the hot dogs at that game?
Had hot dogs been invented by then?
I don't know. I'm asking.
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, okay.
I'm gonna
Later
assume-
innovation then. Later innovation.
I'm going to assume they added hot. Actually, the game I was watching earlier, There was a part where they were showing a guy serving hot dogs, and I laughed. I had a good chuckle.
All right.
I'll talk about that in a bit. So by 1883, the sport had grown popular enough that there were now several high-level teams for the day. And the city of Montreal was pressured to add sporting events to the annual Winter Carnival. Winter Carnival is a pretty big event still to this day. But they added the first ever hockey tournament in 1883. This was played both in the rinks that had been developed in Montreal, as well as on the St. Lawrence River. 4 clubs battled to be crowned what they called themselves the first world champions of ice hockey. McGill University's team won the tournament and the first Carnival Cup. In 1886, those 4 clubs, plus a club out of Ottawa, organized the Amateur Hockey Association of Canada. They played the first season of organized hockey, where there was basically a series of challenges to the winner of the Carnival Cup that would then end up in the tournament next year. In 1889, the Montreal Carnival was attended by the Governor General of Canada, Lord Frederick Stanley.
Ooh.
He saw the blossoming game, and yeah, by now, hundreds of hockey clubs had sprung up around Montreal, Quebec, Ottawa, Toronto, and the region. And Lord Stanley became a patron of the game. His most famous personal contribution was the donation of the Dominion Hockey Challenge Cup to the 1893 winner of the AHAC, which was the Montreal Hockey Club, which is not the Montreal Canadiens. It is a team that is well before them. And yeah, we know Lord Stanley's place in Canada with the Stanley Cup. Everyone's aware it's called the Stanley Cup and what it does now. But it's possible that this isn't his biggest contribution to the game. You see, Lord Stanley's children became acolytes of ice hockey. His daughter, Isabel, was one of the first women, if not the first woman, to play ice hockey, and the Isabel Cup was named after her. His eldest son founded the Ontario Hockey Association, which grew eventually into the Ontario Hockey League. But they also helped invent international hockey. When he returned to England at the end of his time as Governor General, Governor Generals were appointed from England at the time and then would live in Canada for a few years until the next one came along. His sons began to spread word of ice hockey across England. It became popular enough that they eventually played a series of games, including one at Buckingham Palace, where they played against the... seriously.
What year was this?
Like 1899 or something like that.
What? That's cool.
Yeah, ask me who was on the team that they played against.
Who was on the team?
Edward the Seventh and George the Fifth. So they had the Prince of Wales and his son played hockey against the sons of Lord Stanley.
I want to know who would have been brave enough to body check him.
I mean, this is really before the invention of safety gear and contact, so...
They just kind of, like, gracefully skated around each other.
I would imagine that the Prince of Wales didn't have too hard of a time, getting slammed into the board. They probably didn't even have boards. It was probably just like they sprayed some water out at the palace grounds and were skating around on it.
Mm-hmm.
By 1908, the sons and the rich people had built the game enough that it had spread to several other countries: France, Switzerland, Belgium, and Bohemia. And these countries got together and decided to create a European league called the Ligue Internationale de Hockey sur Glace, or the International League of Ice Hockey.
You know what this reminds me of? I was talking to a friend of mine, and this is a little bit of a digression, who lives in the UK, and they mentioned that they think of lacrosse as being a very posh sport that they only play at, like, English boarding schools. And I was like, that's so weird, because I think of lacrosse as a sport for the people, and it's like primarily played by like indigenous communities out here, and it's just like a totally like different like community.
Yeah, it was imported to England in much the same way that hockey was, right?
Yeah.
So the LIHG organized the first international tournament in 1910, the European Championships. Great Britain won that first championship. Other nations joined. Austria, Luxembourg, and Sweden joined in 1912. In 1913, the LIHG attempted to organize a European bandy championship, although records aren't clear if it actually happened. And they were going to do another championship, European championship, but then World War I happened. And that sort of put the kibosh on things for a little while. It's also worthwhile noting that Lord Stanley of Preston wasn't the only person to notice this weird Canadian craze of skating around on ice with a stick. A young American named Malcolm Green Chase visited Niagara Falls. He was an amateur tennis player and semi-pro eventually. And in fact, he's the only person in the Tennis Hall of Fame and the Hockey Hall of Fame.
Huh.
He was a student at Brown, and he went to Niagara Falls for a tennis tournament. And while he was there, he ran into the Montreal Victorias, who were a Stanley Cup winning hockey team, and they introduced him to ice hockey. Not the Victoire, the Victorias, different team. Chase, he was rich. Like, his family owned Berkshire Hathaway at the time. So he was rich as all, Eric, cover your kids' ears, rich as fuck. He gathered a bunch of interested students from Ivy League colleges like Harvard, Yale, Brown. They did like a barnstorming tour of the United States to spread this game. And eventually he transferred to Yale, became their player coach, and participated in the first intercollegiate hockey game, which was Yale versus Johns Hopkins. That was in 1896.
Wow.
So that's how the game kind of spreads to the United States. He is considered the father of American ice hockey. 1896 wasn't just important for ice hockey, though. There was another sporting event that occurred that year. You know what that was, right? The first modern Olympics.
Oh, yeah, I knew that. Uh-huh.
Yeah, so that was held in Athens, Greece. The International Olympic Committee had been founded by a man named Pierre de Coubertin. I'm probably saying that wrong. I'm sorry, Andrew. But he was a French man, but he believed very much in this sort of British school ideal where, you know, a gentleman was somebody who could learn and fight and run and all these things. He believed that it was unsporting of an athlete at the Olympics to be somebody who was professionally trained in that discipline. And this is the origin of the amateurness rules of the Olympics that dominated until for, well, almost 100 years, right?
Yeah, 100 years of stupidity.
Those who played a sport for money would be excluded from the Olympic Games. In 1896, this did not impact the burgeoning game of hockey. And it's not until after the First World War that we first run into this. Mm-hmm. So 1920 in the Summer Olympics, although this was played, I think, in April before the actual Olympic Games in Antwerp, that's when hockey makes its debut. So at this point, 1920, we're a little bit further along. In North America, there are several professional leagues, most notably the National Hockey League, which had taken the place of the NHA because the people in the NHA didn't want to hang out with the guy who owned the Toronto team. All the top athletes in the NHL, in the West Coast League, and a couple others, they were professionals. They were not allowed. Other countries had not yet created a top professional league, but Sweden also hadn't created like really organized hockey play at any level. They were drawing from bandy players. And Europe was missing a lot of people, young men, for some reason. Something had happened.
Something tragic.
But still, the first major international ice hockey tournament that included all possible countries at the time was 1920, the Summer Olympics.
They played it in the summer?
They played it in April. So it was played before the proper Olympics, when there was still ice in the Belgian canals.
Oh, they played it on the canals?
Yeah.
Okay.
They built an ice rink. It was 1920. World War I had just happened.
I mean, I don't know. Sure. They play it on the canals. Bring it back.
Whatever.
We'll do it again.
They should be playing on the canals in Ottawa. Except they can't because of global warming. So the United States and Canada, there have been European games before. The United States and Canada show up for this tournament. And the United States kind of does what we did today. They went to all their amateur clubs and found the best players, guys like Herb Drury and Jerry Guerin, who would go on to play in the NHL. But at this point, we're amateurs. Sweden picked their best bandy players. Canada, which had a organized national amateur tournament, the Allen Cup, which we've spoken about when we talked about the history of the OHL and stuff. They sent the Winnipeg Falcons, the winner of the 1920 Allen Cup.
Ooh.
So this wasn't official best on best hockey, but it was the first tournament that brought everyone together. It's both the first Olympic hockey tournament and the first ice hockey world championship. The Winnipeg Falcons were a group of Icelandic Canadians who, because of discrimination from other people in Winnipeg, had not been allowed to join other teams, so they formed their own. They trounced the competition. The USA held the Falcons to 2 goals, but they beat Sweden in the gold medal final 12-1. Now, it's worth noting, Sweden is the 4th place team because the way they did the tournament was they would have a ladder tournament to get to gold, and then they do a second tournament for silver and a third tournament for bronze.
Ah!
The USA crushed Switzerland 29-0. Canada beat Czechoslovakia 16-0 in their game. In the bronze medal game, Czechoslovakia beat Sweden 1-0.
Huh.
So the Falcons, just as an aside, they're one of the most legendary teams in hockey history. They came through discrimination and through war. There were 8 members of the team in 1914. 7 of them volunteered to go overseas. And when the teams came home, there were 2 empty jerseys in the locker room. 2 of them didn't come back. Team captain Frank Fredrickson, he ended up playing in the NHL, and he was elected to the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1958. And in possibly the greatest tribute any Canadian can receive, he was the subject of a 2014 Heritage Minute where he was played by Jared Kiso, the guy who stars in Letterkenny and Shoresy.
Benjamin, I have a question for you.
Yes.
If you could have like anything you wanted in life, would it be a Heritage Minute about you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Just checking.
Yeah. This team is not just important to Canada. Just, again, this is an aside. Team Iceland calls themselves the Falcons, and the logo they wear is a falcon with a little maple leaf on its breast.
Aww.
So these guys, they were all Icelandic.
That is adorable.
It is. You should look the logo up. It's actually a good little logo. Team Iceland Hockey. Look it up.
Team Iceland Hockey. I am seeing. It kind of looks like a wave. Oh yeah. Okay. Huh. It's real subtle.
Yeah, it's like down at the bottom.
Yeah. It's like half a maple leaf.
But it's still there. Yeah, it's like a wave because they're Iceland, but also it's a falcon.
Yeah.
It's cool.
It's very abstract.
Yeah, well, they are Icelandic, right? Like, that's their thing.
Okay. I'll take your word
But yeah,
for
no,
that.
it's very interesting. And yeah, like these guys, they had a tough war. They went through a lot, so it's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
But the dominance of the Canadian American amateurs was shocking to the LIHG. They added both countries to the growing international league to make sure that they would come back and continue to elevate the play. In 1924, at the first Winter Olympics, although it wasn't called the Winter Olympics, they kind of retconned the first one into being a Winter Olympics. The Toronto Granites won the tournament. They were the Allen Cup winner for that year. They outscored the other teams by a combined total of 110-3.
Ooh, boy. Ouch.
In order to continue to develop, the LIHG brought back European championships, and in 1930 launched the first non-Olympics Ice World Hockey Championship, which Canada won. The yearly Ice Hockey World Championships ran every year. There wasn't an Olympics until 1972, when they first ran parallel to the Olympics. So, one country that was missing constantly from the Olympics and World Championships during this period was Russia. So, and then the Soviet Union. The Russians played bandy and were not interested in ice hockey at this time. Possibly because they kept trying to organize like their own bandy tournaments with the Swedes and the Norwegians and the Finns. And possibly because, this was 1930s Russia. It's not like it was a place where they could just go around building ice hockey rinks and stuff. Professional leagues were starting to pop up in Europe. But the Allen Cup champions from Canada dominated the amateur play required at the championships and Olympics. When the World War II started in 1939, Canada had won 11 of the 13 world championships, which at that time included the Olympics. Great Britain had one, the United States had one. So the Second World War changed a lot of things. The LIHG, as a European primarily organization, headquartered in Belgium, was not able to administer international play during this period, and there wasn't a lot of international play at all. North American hockey did continue, and without access to the World Ice Hockey Championships, the USA and Canada formed a new organization, which is the International Ice Hockey Association, the IIHA. They negotiated wartime rules with the NHL and with the various countries. They brought Britain into this and basically kind of kept amateur play going during the war. The leader of the IIHA, George Hardy, wanted to supplant the LIHG after the war. His stated goal was to get rid of the European-run organization and replace it with a Canadian one, because Canada is the home of hockey and therefore should be the home of hockey. Sweden and France joined the IIHA as the war wound down, but the two sides got together and they merged, forming the IIHF, the International Ice Hockey Federation, in 1948, with George Hardy becoming the first Canadian president of that organization.
So basically he won.
He did and he didn't. So it stayed in Europe and still primarily is, to this day, still looks at European hockey differently. And this is kind of why we still have the divide between North American hockey, and the IIHF continues to work on developing European hockey because the National Hockey League was taking care of Canada. At the time, George Hardy assumed that Canada would continue to dominate the post-war tournaments. But that's not true. We'll talk about that in a second. So North American professional hockey, the war had forced the NHL into the original six era. The Great Depression had begun to knock out unstable teams, and the war finished this off. And that left the Habs, the Rangers, Blackhawks, Bruins, Red Wings, and Maple Leafs. A lot of the best players ended up joining the military, but the NHL was ordered to continue to play in order to maintain morale. And this allowed for the first superstar player to emerge. Maurice the Rocket Richard dominated the 1944 season, scoring 50 goals in 50 games, something that became the benchmark for goal scoring excellence in the NHL. It's only been done a handful of times. Not even Alexander Ovechkin has done it. So although, Ovechkin's the greatest goal scorer of all time, the Rocket was the first one to pull this off. And he was followed by Gordie Howe as a major star, and then Bobby Hull and Stan Mikita. TV and radio were spreading across North America like wildfire, and that made the game easier to follow than ever. You didn't have to buy a ticket anymore. You just listen to the game. And by the 1960s, the NHL was talking about expansion. And that would double the amount of professionals in the NHL, opening up 120 plus new slots for players. These players would come from the AHL and the IHL, the International Hockey League, which was the AHL's competitor at this time. And then they would bring new players in their ranks and so forth. So this would basically have the effect of taking approximately the top 120 Canadian amateur athletes and making them professional somewhere along the way.
So then they couldn't play in the Olympics.
Mm-hmm. And that wasn't it. In 1971, the World Hockey Association was announced, which would add more professional leagues to the game. More professional teams to the game. But even before this started to happen, things had changed at the World Championships. So North America wasn't the only part of the world where professional leagues were starting to spring up. There was the Oberliga in West Germany, Hockeyetten in Sweden, the Czechoslovak First Ice Hockey League in Czechoslovakia. But one part of the world entered hockey in a different way, and that was the Soviet Union. Following the Second World War, the USSR determined that dominance at international sport was a strategic goal during the Cold War, as a way to demonstrate the superiority of communism to the capitalist systems of the West. The Soviets established their first hockey league in 1946, the Soviet Championship League. But this league was officially an amateur league. The players were not professional hockey players. They worked at steel mills and for farms, and they worked for major companies, aircraft factories, and more than anything, they were soldiers in the Russian military.
Wow.
CSKA Moscow is literally, CSKA means the Central Sports Club of the Army. These were soldiers whose deployment was to play hockey full time.
Really skirting the spirit of the rule there.
But at this time, the Soviet Union had significant influence in the IOC and the IIHF because they had a lot of constituent nations in the Eastern Bloc who would do what they were told. The IOC put a lot of pressure on the IIHF to kind of do it their way and recognize the Soviets. This is not just hockey, right?
Right.
Like, oh, there's a high jumper. He's not a professional. He's a soldier, but his soldierly duties are to high jump all day. And oh, he's a boxer, but he's not a professional. He's a sailor. Like all of sport was like this in the Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. Interestingly enough, a lot of people think the original team that was going to be the super team, the CSKA basically became where the best players were. It dominated the league for years and years. But a lot of people think the original team was going to be VVS Moscow. VVS is was the Soviet Air Force. Mm-hmm. VVS Moscow was run directly by Vasily Stalin, the son of Joseph Stalin. But their plane crashed in 1950 and killed almost the whole team. They actually covered up the plane crash, replaced the players mid-season, didn't tell anybody, and then that team failed out.
That is so tragic and wild.
Yeah. Fucked up, right?
That is completely screwed up. Yeah.
Yeah. Viktor Tikhonov, who became the coach of the Soviets later on, 1980, something happened. He played for VVS Moscow, but had been traded to the Dynamo Moscow team just before the accident.
Oh, real sliding doors moment for that guy.
Yeah, it worked out okay for him. The team was eventually liquidated, not in the Soviet sense.
Well,
but just like,
look, they throw people out of windows. They don't liquidate them.
I mean, when Stalin fell, his son fell out of favor as well. So the team was removed because it was considered too inextricably tied to the Air Force and to Vasily Stalin. Mm-hmm. So that CSKA became the favorite team, and they put all their top talent in it. So yeah, these guys, they had one assignment in the military, playing hockey. They trained like soldiers, but practiced like players, and they rose to the top of the Soviet League. Because they had papers saying they were full-time soldiers, they were allowed in the IIHF World Championships and the Winter Olympics. In 1954, so only 4 years after the program really starts.
Wow.
The Soviet Union wins their first IIHF gold medal. In 1956, they win Olympic gold. Neither would be their last. And this sudden emergence caused a short panic in Canada, with some suggesting, though, the Reds gave us what for, and maybe we need to fix things. Others just said, the Soviets are cheating, who cares? And if we were allowed to send our best players, they would get the crap beat out of them.
I can imagine this. Like, I can almost hear the talk radio. It's like, it's all Jeff Marek. Like, everybody sounds like Jeff Marek, but I can hear it.
All Canadians sound like Jeff Marek. This is a well-known fact.
That's true.
So by the 1960s, Canada's early dominance at international hockey had completely evaporated. The amateurs weren't as good, and the Soviets were not amateurs. Mm-hmm. It had been replaced by the cold hand of communism.
Stop.
At the same time, Canadians had more incredible hockey stars in their everyday life than ever. So the Canadians scoffed at this international play. They were certain if our professionals went to the Olympics, they would crush the evil communists. Mm-hmm. Canada did want to work on the amateur aspect of the game. They founded Hockey Canada at this time. And they began to lobby immediately for the inclusion of professionals at the IIHF level. The IIHF agreed to a trial where up to 9 professional players could play on one team at once. The next international tournament was the Izvestia Cup, which I think Izvestia is literally like ice hockey, but...
In what language?
Russian.
Okay.
a Soviet-run tournament that celebrated the October Revolution. The Canadian team brought 5 professionals, and just to let you know who was there, the top player was Billy Harris of the Penguins, whom you haven't heard of and never will again.
Yeah, doesn't ring a bell.
Like, he was a good player on the early Penguins that were dog shit. It was hardly the best Canada had to offer. There's no Phil Esposito, no Bobby Orr, no Bobby Hull.
Why didn't they send Phil Esposito?
Because this tournament took place in like November and December during the middle of the NHL season. So they just kind of grabbed a bunch of college players, including some no-name hack named Ken Dryden, sent them over. But they were able to get a handful of NHL players of some value and send them over.
This reminds me of Matty Beniers playing in that COVID Olympics.
Yeah, it's something like that. So the Izvestia Cup, obviously being played in Russia, was very prestigious to the Soviets, and they very nearly lost. In fact, I think they actually tied Canada in their game. It was like a round robin type thing, much like the Soviets freaked out, and the IIHF had an emergency meeting, and the Soviets demanded that the professional rule get scrapped. They put pressure on the IOC. The IOC weighed in and said, we want to scrap it. We don't want professionals at the Olympics. They scrapped the professional trial. Canada
Sore losers.
Oh, the Soviets.
And they didn't even lose. Really sore.
But they almost lost. And if Canada had sent... And I would think that at that point they're thinking, if Canada sends Bobby Orr and Phil Esposito and Tony Esposito and, Yvon Cornier and, we are in trouble. So we got to put the kibosh on this. As a result of this, Canada withdrew from all international hockey competition. Canada did not send a team to the World Championships or the Olympics for the next, I think it was 7 years.
Wow.
So this is the backdrop we come to in 1971. Canada's sport and cultural consul to the USSR, which apparently is the thing you have, Gary Smith, read that the Soviets were interested in finding new challenges in the game of ice hockey in Izvestia newspaper. I think that is literally a Canadian diplomat reading a Soviet ice hockey newspaper. Canada's match to the United States, Robert Ford worked with chairman for the State Committee for Physical Culture and Sport of the USSR, Sergei Pavlov. Competing proposals flew back and forth, and a deal was signed at the World Championships in Prague in April of 1972. An 8-game tournament. Canada versus the Soviet Union. Best on best for the first time ever. The soldier athletes of communism versus the best Canadian hockey players in the NHL. But only the NHL. That's right. In order to get the Canadian teams to agree to send their players, and also to grease the wheels a little bit. There's a whole bunch of bullshit with this I'm not going to get into. But I want you to know there's bullshit involved. So, director of the NHLPA, who is also the head of Hockey Canada, which is probably a conflict, all-time Canadian asshole Alan Eagleson ensured only NHL stars would participate. He made it a requirement of members on the team to sign a contract. So he appointed Harry Sinden to be coach, and Harry Sinden went about picking the team, and they put up the list of team names, people who were named, and then they went, but you can only join if you sign an NHL contract right now. At the time, a lot of these players were looking at signing with the WHA. The WHA had taken Bobby Hull out of Chicago. They said publicly, they said, Bobby Hull, what would it take you to go to the WHA? He said, I don't know, a check for $1 million. At the time, that's a ridiculous amount of money for a hockey player. They gave him $1 million, so he went to Winnipeg.
I respect it. He could set his family up for life.
I would need $1 million to go to Winnipeg. Yeah, because, Brett Hull, he needed the help. For reference, Bobby Hull's an asshole too, and he was just a piece of shit. But Alan Eagleson was also a piece of shit. This is just one of the many things he did. I will do an in-depth dive on Alan Eagleson for you someday because you will be appalled.
I'm ready to be appalled.
So Gary Cheevers, Derek Sanderson, I think he is related to Jake Sanderson, J.C. Tremblay, And of course, Bobby Hull did not go on the team as a result. Bobby Orr was injured. His knees were always bad. He didn't make the team. So it's not really the best of Canada, but it's like pretty close. Pierre Trudeau personally intervened to try to get Bobby Hull on the team. And Alan Eagleson refused to do anything about it. Directors of Hockey Canada resigned over this. And even Harold Ballard pressured Alan Eagleson to allow Bobby Hull on the team. And Harold Ballard fucking hated the WHA.
Wow.
Now, part of the reason for this is Harold Ballard was on trial for corruption at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Harold Ballard, for those who don't remember, is the longtime asshole owner of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Ballard, I don't like. Just go ask Sean McIndoe if you could at Down Goes Brown on Twitter and say, "Hey, what about Harold Ballard?" And then watch his blood pressure spike. But Harold Ballard was on trial for a whole bunch of corruption charges at the time. He would eventually be found guilty of 40 of them or something like that. So he made real nice with Hockey Canada during this period of time. He said, you can have Toronto Maple Leaf Gardens as your practice center. We'll support you, whatever you want. And then as soon as he was convicted of the crime, he sent Hockey Canada a bill.
What a guy.
Just a real prick. But even with these antics, the two teams that faced off in the 72 Summit Series could be called, in fact, are the greatest collection of talent up to that time in one tournament. The USSR had Vladislav Tretiak, Alexander Yakushev, and Valery Karmelov. And Canada brought Phil Antoni Esposito, Rod Gilbert, Bobby Clark, Yvonne Cornier, Ken Dryden, Stan Mikita, Brad Park, Serge Savard.
These are all very familiar names.
Yeah, these are the best hockey players in the world. They weren't sure what to call them. They wanted to call them like the Dream Team was one name that Harry Sinden floated, which
that would
Yvonne
never
Cornier
work.
Yvonne Cornier said, "That's not us. We're Team Canada," and that's how Team Canada got its name.
Its name, which is Team Canada.
Yeah, it's not very original, but it's very Canadian. I can't explain it. I mean, I can't imagine being from a country so arrogant as to call a collection of talent sent to an international tournament the Dream Team. Can't imagine what that would be like, SJ.
No. Yeah, weird.
Weird. So for the first time ever, Team Canada took to the ice in Montreal at the legendary Forum, and they lost.
Panic!
They lost 7-3.
Oh, that's a beating. Although this was before they invented goaltending.
Ken Dryden was pretty good. Like, it is before the invention of goaltending, but Ken Dryden was pretty good. But we'll talk about this in a little bit because this is kind of the invention of goaltending in North America.
Yeah.
The conclusion of the first 4 games in Canada, the Soviets were up 2 wins, 1 loss, 1 tied. There was a 2-week break that followed, during which Canada played exhibition games against the Czechoslovaks and the Swedes. The Swedes tied them. I watched this game while I was writing this, or while I was updating this earlier today, and the Swedes outplay Canada a lot. There was one really vicious play in the Sweden game where Phil Esposito was very roughly removed from the net front by a young guy from Sweden called Borja Salming. And it's just, that's not the last time those two guys ever meet. But Borja Salming did call him a fucking blonde bastard on the ice. So that was pretty funny.
That is funny.
Canada eventually won the last 3 games, the 72 Summit Series to win. It was close, and there's so many shenanigans, and I don't want to get into it here because the legendary stories of like them taking apart their hotel rooms to look for bugs and trying to order pizza and like storming off the ice and the Soviets calling them up on midway through the third to say that they were tied and they were going to claim victory on goal differential. Like it's wild. It is truly a wild story. But no matter who won, it was an incredible victory for the game of hockey. So first of all, best on best proved to be wildly successful. Like, Canada stopped to watch these games, especially the last ones. The Soviets were thrilled. They almost won. Like, they were upset, but they weren't like that upset. They were very happy to win the Canadian portion of it.
Mm-hmm.
And they were interested in coming back and doing more. But the close call made North Americans wake up and look at what the Soviets were doing. So their coaching and training methods were studied, This is the beginning of the end of the no workout off season in hockey. When Team Canada showed up for the Summit Series, they didn't have a training camp. They were out of shape because during the summer they didn't do shit. They ate pizza and drank beer.
And smoked cigarettes.
By the time, and a lot of cigarettes. Stan Mikita famously smoked cigarettes every game. Like he would, the last thing he did before he got on the ice would finish a cigarette and flick it over his shoulder. It was his good luck charm.
Oh, litterer too.
But they worked their butts off to get into shape during that 2-week break. And when they went to Russia, they were a lot more physically ready for the game. Mm-hmm. They saw that the soldiers of CSKA Moscow were in shape. And it was one of the reasons they were able to come out so hard that first game. Canada held that very close throughout the first 40 in that first game. And then they were just gassed. And the Soviets ran over them in the third.
So the Canadians were just arrogant.
Oh, 100%. 100%. But also, like, they weren't trained. Mm-hmm. Like, I think it is fair to say that a professional soldier has a higher level of fitness than a professional North American athlete did at that time.
Yeah.
And that's changed. The 80s, it started to really change. And now, obviously, these guys are psychos when it comes to their fitness. Another thing that had shocked Canada was the play of Vladislav Tretiak. So during the run-up, the Canadians were allowed to go watch a CSKA Moscow game in person. This is before tape trading and all that. Mm-hmm. But they very, very carefully chose to show the team the day after Tretiak's wedding. So you might know a little bit about what Russian wedding ceremonies are like, but they involve a metric ton of vodka. So the entire team had been at this wedding, and they were all hungover as shit for this game. Tretiak himself was notably, like, wrecked, like, visibly wrecked. So the Canadians took down a bunch of notes about this team, like, yeah, the goaltender's not very good, can't do anything, no good stick, doesn't have his gloves slow. And then it just turns out he's one of the greatest goaltenders of all time. Tretiak played an early version of the butterfly, and watching Tretiak on TV led a lot of Canadian coaches, youth coaches, to change how they were teaching goaltending. The stand-up style began to go away. And in 1986, a skinny 19-year-old Quebec kid named Patrick hauled a very mid Montreal Canadiens all the way to the Stanley Cup, winning his first of 3 Conn Smythes. Today, every professional goaltender plays butterfly. And it starts in North America here. Without the Summit Series, this could go on for a long time where we play the stand-up style.
It sounds like it starts with Tretiak.
It does. It starts with the European style and the fact that the Russians had their own thing going on. But because of the isolation between IIHF and professional, the professional game was never exposed to it and wouldn't have been until like the 90s. Like when these players started coming over, no goaltenders came over in the 80s, right?
That's weird.
Yeah. And finally, North American hockey realized it's not just Canada and like a few states in the United States. It's not like, they're not expecting to find hockey players in Arizona at this point. Mm-hmm. It's Minnesota and Massachusetts and Michigan, and that's about it. In 1973, the Toronto Maple Leafs tendered contract to 2 players that Canada had played against in Sweden, Inge Hammerstrom and Börje Salming. Salming became the first European megastar in North America. In Toronto, they just call him King. He was the first Swede and the second European inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame. And who was that first European? Vladislav Tretiak, the goaltender.
Wow.
And yeah, because modern goaltending does come from him. And, it's kind of incredible to imagine our game without these changes. Where would we be without the legendary fitness of guys like Chris Chelios and Sidney Crosby? Or where would we be without players like the Sedins and Alina Müller and Alex Ovechkin? Or the Butterfly, like look at Connor Hellebuck and Jonathan Quick and Emmerich Smashmeyer. You see, this whole thing turns on this series. They added new stars, new skills. Players start wearing helmets so that they can get more rough and tumble and be more aggressive and don't fear the puck as much. The goaltending equipment gets better. Goaltenders become more athletic. And all of this, like this is the first time these guys are introduced to it. it is a sea change. There was a second Summit Series in 1974. Because Eagleson had snubbed the World Hockey Association, that league wanted in on the action. The Soviets were happy to oblige. It followed the exact same format, 4 games in Canada, 4 games in Russia, but this time the Soviets won, 4-1-3. It confirmed the Soviet belief that they could defeat Canadian professionals. The WHA was a competing league with a lower quality of player, but it could also call on many stars, Bobby Hull, Marek, and Gordie Howe leading the way. The tournament sold well, and diplomatically, both sides seemed happy, which led to the creation of the Super Series, wherein teams from the Soviet League played NHL teams throughout the 80s and 70s. The Soviets posted a 55-33-10 record during the set of exhibitions. In 1975, Gunther Sabetsky of West Germany became the president of the IIHF. His primary goal was to bring Canada back to IIHF participation. Canada wanted professionals to be involved in the IIHF championship, and a happy medium was found when they agreed the tournament would be held during the Stanley Cup playoffs, but players from eliminated teams could go.
Okay.
Canada agreed not to host the tournament, so okay, you can have it in Europe, that's important to you. But the IIHF also agreed on the creation of a pure best-on-best tournament, the first time that it would be done between multiple countries, the Canada Cup. In 1977, NHL pros returned to the World Ice Hockey Championship, and Canada placed 4th. The Canada Cup itself was in 1976. The first tournament invited the best players from the 6 largest hockey countries in the world: the USSR, Czechoslovakia, Finland, Sweden, the United States, and Canada. The tournament was a round robin, and the top 2 teams would then have a final face-off. This was Bobby Orr's one big international tournament, and he scored 9 points in 7 games to earn MVP honors. The Czechoslovakians came second. They tied the Americans and beat the Soviets. The next Canada Cup was delayed from 1979 due to a dispute between the Canadian Amateur Hockey Association and Hockey Canada,
Shocking.
and delayed again in 1980 due to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. So that means the next most important international event was the 1980 Olympic tournament in Lake Placid. SJ, you do know what happened in 1980, don't you?
Some kind of improbable... I don't want to go so far as to call it a miracle.
I think Kurt Russell did something.
It was a bad movie. I'm sorry, but that Disney movie was lousy. I didn't like it.
I think it's I think it's overrated.
I think the movie stinks.
That team of gifted American amateurs beat the Soviets, as we know, in the Miracle on Ice. And it didn't really send a shockwave through the same way that it did Canada. The USSR remained the primary nation at international tournaments until the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1991. Mm-hmm. And even they won the 1992 Olympic gold as the unified team. This was still before there were pros at the Olympics. But what changed in the 1980s was the desire of players to come to North America. Players began to defect, most notably the Stastny brothers from Czechoslovakia. Peter Stastny and his brother Anton joined the Quebec Nordiques, and Peter became the highest scoring player of the 1980s, not named Wayne Gretzky.
Ooh.
The late 80s saw Russians begin to come over, like Alexander Mogilny and Sergei Fedorov. Defected players were not allowed to play in the Canada Cup by their central organizing committees, so the Stastnys never got to play for Czechoslovakia at the Canada Cup.
Well, that stinks.
So it wasn't, we only really got the one real best-on-best tournament where the WHA and NHL players and all the international players could come. Of course, they're great tournaments, and all Canadians have the image of Lemieux backpassing to Gretzky backpassing to Lemieux is seared in their brains. But we really didn't see true best-on-best men's hockey until 1996, with the World Cup of Hockey, which is the Canada Cup, was changed to. Here, this is where the legacy of the Miracle of Ice comes full circle, as the United States won the first real, true best-on-best tournament in 20 years.
Woo!
And ever since then,
USA! 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 Okay, I'm done.
And ever since then, the United States has been a contender at the top level. 1998 brought top-level hockey to the Olympics for the first time. Twice. Women's hockey had not developed at the same level as men's hockey, and in many ways developed kind of backwards. International play came first. Gunther Sabetsky was a proponent of hockey for everyone and had been responsible for setting up the first organized play in Germany for women.
What a good
He
guy.
Created an Asian and European Women's Cup in the 1980s. And on March 19th, 1990, in the Ottawa Civic Centre, today called TD Place Arena, puck dropped on a new tournament, the IIHF Women's World Championship. In 1992, the IOC agreed to add women's hockey to the 98 games. Even though the Nagano organizing committee pushed back, they didn't think the women's game was worth it. So it was a limited tournament of 6 countries, and the United States won. On the men's side, the first tournament where the NHL showed up, the Czechs won, led by Hall of Famer Dominik Hasek, and surely soon to stop playing hockey, maybe Jaromir Jagr. It's kind of crazy that Jagr is still playing hockey.
You know what else happened in 1972 that's kind of relevant to this?
Well,
Title IX
what's
passed.
that? It's true, yeah. Yeah, I mean, 1990 is 18 years later, so.
Yeah.
Angela James, Cami Granato.
Made a big difference.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a reason why the top Canadian women still go to American schools, right? It's where the best training for women's hockey players is right now.
Yeah, 100%. And that's because of Title IX.
Absolutely. So to finish this up, the 2000s brought us some incredible tournaments. The Swedes won the men's tournament in 2006. And the 2002 and 2010 Olympics ended Canada versus USA, men and women. Canada won all 4 of those matchups.
Yeah.
The rivalry for women's hockey between Canada and the USA reached an absolute fever pitch in an insane game where the referees, who were also American, called 13 minor penalties against Canada. Sidney Crosby scored the golden goal in 2010. A goal so famous it's literally in the video they show to people after they're sworn in as Canadian citizens. The NHL refused to send players to 2018 and 2022. And this break in best-on-best men's tournament really heightened interest in the women's tournament, with the legendary Canada versus USA rivalry highlighted by dueling Olympic wins. The USA won by shootout in 2018, and in 2022, Canada won 3-2. The rivalry hasn't slowed down since, with Canada beating USA 6-5 in Utica last year in one of the best hockey games I've ever watched. It's easy to see how this leads directly to the creation of the PWHL. There was a demand to see these stars on a big stage. And, the Walter family obviously took advantage of that. Now we're getting the 4 Nations tournament, which probably would have been a World Cup if Russia hadn't been suspended from the IIHF due to invading the Ukraine. And you can go check out our second ever episode for a long, in-depth discussion on that.
This is like basically traditional though. Like the Russia being on the outs with the rest of the international community, and then like what that mean, how that affects international hockey. It's just like, yeah, it's normal.
I mean, there really hasn't been too many full best-on-best tournaments, because the 76 Canada Cup, the 96 World Cup, the Olympics in 2002 and 2010, and 2014 maybe. The Russians doped so hard at that. I don't think the hockey players did, but you can't tell. And that's it.
Yep.
Like, we haven't had unfettered best-on-best otherwise. But I'm really hoping that we do in 2026. Hopefully that means peace in Ukraine. That'd be really good. Maybe peace not on Vladimir Putin's terms.
That's the concern.
But I'm really looking forward to it. And even if the Russians don't show up, which would kind of suck for Alexander Ovechkin, it's going to be interesting because Sidney Crosby and Connor McDavid and Austin Matthews and Connor Hellebuck, that's really cool.
Even without Russia, the next Olympics is going to be, I think, really cool. I think it's going to be a great tournament.
Well, and on the women's side, I'm sorry, but the IIHF tournament last year I thought was better than ever with the amount of pro experience that's coming through the game now. I can't wait to see what these teams look like after another year of PWHL action. I mean, obviously, anybody who is Canadian and plays for Toronto is going to make the Canadian team. But other than that, it's who knows? Players can play themselves on a team. There's a real league for this to happen in now, where you can go see Poulin versus Knight a bunch of times every year. That's really cool.
Yep.
And I think finally it's going to help that international game. And like I said, it's the opposite. The international game drove professional interests.
Yeah, I think it's going to help the European teams.
Absolutely. Those European players that have come over are getting to play in such a bigger league. You can tell the difference. But it's also growing desire to play in those countries. There's more women playing hockey in Europe now than ever. And that is excellent.
That's right.
Anyway, that's the end of that. Is there any other questions you have to ask? Did you learn anything valuable today?
I learned so much. I actually learned too much, and I'm going to have to listen to this whole segment again after we get it up on the feed, because it was really fascinating.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. I guess we can probably end here.
Yeah, this is an extra long episode.
Sorry, John. John's going to have to edit this. I apologize that it's very long. It might even be a little late getting to you because it's pretty long. So, folks, you've been listening to the Neutral Zone Hotel, which is written, hosted, and produced by the Neutral Zone Hotel crew. You can hit us up at neutralzonehotel.com. We always want to thank our friend Emily Mowbray for designing our super logo. You can get us on Instagram or Blue Sky at Neutral Zone Hotel. Email us at neutralzonefeedback@neutralzonehotel.com. Our Discord is neutralzonehotel.com/Discord. You can hang out with us. We are actually pretty cool. Well, I'm not, but SJ's all right. If you like this episode, rate us 5 stars on your podcast platform. Give us a thumbs up. Smash the like button on YouTube. Thanks so much for stopping by, and we'll see you next time.